He says, "These voyages of exploration and discovery are the latest in a long series that have characterized and distinguished human history. In the 5th and 16th centuries, you could travel from Spain to the Azores in a few days, the same time it takes us now to cross the channel from the Earth to the Moon. It took then a few months to traverse the Atlantic Ocean and reach what was called the New World, the Americas. Today it takes a few months to cross the ocean of the inner solar system and make planetfall on Mars or Venus," which was truly, literally new worlds awaiting us. In the 17th and 18th centuries, you could travel from Holland to China in a year or two, the time it has taken Voyager to travel from Earth to Jupiter. Again, I just thought it was interesting parallels between our travel times from the past and today. This part is, I'm not going to read any quotes, but it's talking about Holland and how important Holland was for scientific progress. Galileo apparently escaped to Holland when he was being investigated by inquisitors in the church, of course. Holland safeguarded him. It also mentions that during the many intellectuals escaped to Holland when the Nazis were around. It also mentions Spinoza was the home, Holland was the home of Spinoza, of Descartes, and of John Locke. And the other thing that's interesting here about Descartes is he's a coward, and I'll read you what he said here in response to Galileo's investigations against him by the church. This is in 1634. "Doubtless you know that Galileo was recently censored by the inquisitors of the faith, and that his views about the movement of the earth were condemned as heretical. I must tell you that all the things I explained in my treatise, which included the doctrine of the movement of the earth, were so interdependent that it is enough to discover that one of them is false to know that all the arguments I was using are unsound. Though I thought they were based on very certain and evident proofs, I would not wish for anything in the world to maintain them against the authority of the Church. I desire to live in peace and to continue the life I have begun under the motto, to live well you must live unseen." So Descartes' a coward, and he cowered under the church when Galileo was getting in some heat. So this is on page 119. This is more stuff on the dualism of heaven versus the earth that I thought was interesting. The discovery that the earth is turning rather than the sky moving had important implications for Copernicus, or for the uniqueness of the earth and the possibility of life elsewhere. The first person to make explicit the idea of a large, indeed an infinite number of other worlds in orbit about other suns seems to have been Giordano Bruno, and I think Bruno was burned at the stake for that. This next part on page 120 is talking more about the other world hypothesis. And at the time, it was ridiculed, and this argument made by Robert Merton was used to make a reductio ad absurdum of the argument that there are many worlds out there. So this is what he says. "For if the firmament be of such an incomparable bigness as these Copernical giants will have it, so vast and full of innumerable stars, as being infinite in extent, why may we not suppose those infinite stars visible in the firmament to be so many suns, with particular fixed centers, to have likewise their subordinate planets, as the sun hath his dancing still around him? And so, in consequence, there are infinite habitable worlds. What hinders that argument?" So he's kind of saying that, okay, so if we're, what he's combating here is the heliocentric model of the universe. He's saying here is that, okay, so if we're not the center of the universe and the habitable world and the center of the universe, then what's going to happen is that our sun is the center of the universe, and every other star is a sun, that has its own planets and its own habitable universes. And there's going to be an infinite number of those, and therefore an even greater infinite, if that's possible, number of planets that are habitable. He's trying to like throw it all out and say, well, this seems crazy. It seems crazy that there's just billions of worlds out there. So that's trying to way of blocking that. But then Carl Sagan says that if Merton was alive today, he would be obliged to deduce infinite habitable worlds. And this next part is actually very interesting. This is on the same page, on page 120. There's, of course, this resistance to getting rid of the heliocentric model of the universe, because it puts us at the center. And that seems to be divinely inspiring, I guess, to many for the longest time. But then some scientists that also still think that they're religious, and they're just looking at the world, and they want to be innocent, and they think, of course, they're looking into the beauty of the creation, right? But what they say is that we don't have to have a single creation episode here on Earth. Why can't the universe and all the other planets and all the other stars, why are they also not a creation? And why can't those other planets out there not have life that's also a creation? Like, who are we to limit God and what he can create and experiment with on other planets? So it's kind of using the argument against the religious who are saying, oh no, we're the only ones. And so this is the quote. It says here, should we allow the plants nothing but vast deserts and deprive them of all those creatures that more plainly bespeak their divine architect? We should sink them below the earth in beauty and dignity, a thing very unreasonable. So at this part in the book, we're talking about an astronomer named Huygens, Huygens, and he has some interesting things to say. So what I had just read is from him about why can other planets have life, because wouldn't that just be also God experimenting and being a divine architect? But he also says this. He says that, this is on page 121, he says, "'Tis a very ridiculous opinion, that it is impossible a rational soul should dwell in any other shape than ours." So there was this idea that I think is still kind of fairly modern, that there's no other way to have other intelligent beings out there unless they look humanoid. And of course, if you look at Star Trek, I think almost all of the species are humanoid. Like they're 2 arms and 2 legs and have a face and have a torso and legs and all that. But even this guy, this Huygens guy, is saying that it's ridiculous to assert that rational souls out there all must look like us. And so I'll continue. You could be smart, he was saying, even if you look peculiar. But he then went on to argue that they would not look very peculiar, as in very different. You can't be a slime. You can't have intelligent slime, he would probably say. That they must have hands and feet and walk upright. You can't have intelligent hamsters that are riding around in spaceships. It's not possible. So even Huygens is saying they can look different than us, but they can't be very different. They must have hands and feet and walk upright. They must have writing and geometry. And they must even use, he says here, they must use their planets for navigational purposes. He actually says, Jupiter has its 4 Galilean satellites, which are the moons, to provide a navigational aid for the sailors in the Jovian oceans. Jupiter's, I don't think Jupiter has oceans, but Jovian is for Jupiter. He claimed science is his religion, and then argued that the planets must be inhabited because otherwise God had made worlds for nothing. I thought that was really interesting, that even this Huygens guy is saying that there's other planets out there, there's life out there, because why would God make these planets unless there's life to enjoy them? I don't know. But so that was another argument, without evidence, of course, but another speculation about, okay, so we have this metaphysics, we have this supernatural metaphysics, where we are eroding the idea of there being a geocentric universe, and that we're the only creation. And we're eroding the idea that of the heavens being some other universe and then the earth being a universe. We are starting to be convinced that the world beyond our planet has the same physics and laws as this planet. But we still have that view that God created everything. So therefore there's a teleology implied in everything. So if something exists, there must be a reason for it. And so the thought of the day, of the Huygens day, was that, okay, God makes a planet, there's life on here. God makes other planets, and must have a purpose. The sun has a purpose, is to give warmth and light to the solar system. I don't know what he would say about the asteroid belt. They probably didn't know about the asteroid belt. But all the other planets in the solar system, Huygens would say that they have a purpose. They were created for a purpose, otherwise why would God make Mars? Why would God make Venus and all that kind of stuff? Why would God make Venus if it's just some hydrogen, sulfuric acid cloud, terrible planet? Or Mars and its 1% atmosphere? Why would they bother with that? And even Huygens probably says that the moon is for moonlight and for navigating at night. Like it has a purpose. Everything's supposed to have a purpose, right, under this teleological metaphysics. And so the other planets are then supposed to also have a purpose, and therefore life or something is supposed to, there's some reason to be there. Otherwise, God would not have created Mars. It would have just left it out as empty. Like there'd be no Mars. There'd be no Jupiter unless Jupiter had a purpose. That kind of stuff. That kind of thinking. But it's interesting because it's incorporating of science, but yet still some religious metaphysics. This next part is some really interesting stuff about Jupiter. So you can see we're going through the planets here. And it's talking about Io, which is one of its moons. Something really interesting about its surface. It has a dynamic surface of sulfur